Hello and welcome to Chemspec Digital 2021. I have the pleasure to introduce the next presentation in the Regulatory Services Lecture Theatre. However, before I do, I would like to point out that we are recording this session to make it available to view on demand. Attendees are invited to submit their question via the chat function, from where we will read them out at the end of the presentation. And now, I will hand over to Bryan Zhou of CIRS, who will be presenting the latest chemical regulation updates in China. Over to you, Bryan.
Okay, thank you, Ricardo. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending my webinar. So today I'm going to introduce the latest chemical regulation updates in China. My name is Bryan Zhou, and I'm from CIRS Europe, based in Dublin, Ireland. So before I start my webinar, please bear with me 1 minute and let me introduce our company briefly. So the full name of CIRS is Chemical Inspection and Regulation Service Limited. We are a chemical regulation consulting company, and we mainly focus on different areas, including like EU, UK, China, Korea, Japan, and other Southeast Asian countries. Our headquarters is based in Hangzhou, China, and the main office in EU is based in Dublin, Ireland. Meanwhile, we also have different subsidiaries in US, Korea, and UK. Okay, so for today's webinar, I will firstly introduce the regulation framework in China, and then I will briefly introduce the new China REACH, which is one of the biggest topic in the chemical regulation area in this year. Then I will also introduce some updates of the Hazardous Chemical Management in China. Lastly, I will also introduce the China Realty standards, which has been implemented since this year. Okay, so the first part is about the chemical regulation framework in China. As you can see, in China, it mainly consists of two parts. Firstly, you need to check if your target substance is new chemical or existing chemical in China. If it's new chemical, you need to consider to comply with the China REACH. And another thing is about if your target substance or final product is hazardous product or chemical in China. If it's hazardous chemical, you may need to comply with some hazardous chemical registration, like China GHS. You need to prepare the qualified China SDS and the labeling. And also you may need to comply with some permission license system, which depends on your activities in China. So firstly, I will introduce the new chemical substance notification, which is also known as the China REACH. As you may know, since the beginning of this year, the new China REACH has been implemented. So basically, before you sell your chemical products into China, you need to check your substance or the composition of your mixture final product. If there's any ingredients or substance is new chemical in China. In order to check the new chemical substance in China, you need to search the IECSC, the inventory of existing chemical substance in China. So basically for this IECSC, there are two parts of this inventory, the public inventory and the confidential inventory. The public inventory is free to search. You can either go to our inventory system or you can go to the official website to download the free public inventory to search your target substance. If you find your substance is not listed in the public inventory, you may consider to search the confidential inventory as well. For this confidential inventory, you need to pay some administrative fee to the authority and make an application to them. Generally, in 1 month, they will issue an official result and let you know if your target substance is new or existing in China. So this IECSC inventory is actually a dynamic inventory. The authority added some new substance into this inventory regularly. So it's very important to monitor this inventory and also the China REACH frequently. So if we confirm the target substance is new in China, you need to consider to comply with this China REACH notification. Basically, for China REACH, the key factor you need to consider is either the exporter, the foreign exporter, or the local Chinese importer should comply with China REACH notification. Basically, who introduced directly the new chemical into China should take the obligations. And if you are a foreign company, you may need to consider to appoint a Chinese local agent, which normally we call it only representative in China, to help you comply with the China REACH notification. For this only representative, it's very important because they will take all the obligations under China REACH with you together. And it's very important for them to communicate with the local authorities for the registration and also post-registration supervisions. And also they should have very strong expertise and practical experience to support you to comply with the China REACH notification. So it's very important for you to choose a qualified China REACH agent. So regarding this China REACH, generally there are three notification types under China REACH. If your tonnage band is less than 1 ton per year, or your product is a polymer and it's a polymer of low concern, you should consider record filling. However, if your tonnage band is more than 1 ton per year, or your polymer is not a polymer of low concern, based on tonnage band, you may choose to process simplified registration or regular registration. The main difference is for record filling, generally there is no data requirement. You don't need to prepare any full data reports. But for simplified registration and the regular registration, you need to prepare the full data reports accordingly. Generally, under China REACH, all the submission is individual submissions, but based on specific conditions, you may also consider to process like joint registration or CIRS registration. Joint registration is if you find some other companies which is planned to process the China REACH of the same substance, you may join them to process a joint registration together. And also, if you have a serial of similar substance which have very similar molecular structure, you may consider to process the serial registration with one set of data. So regarding this record filling, as I just mentioned, you don't need to prepare any data reports. And besides, once you submit the dossier, you can start your business in China directly, either manufacture or import the new chemical in China. It's mainly because there's no dossier review or approval procedure from the authority after you submit the dossier. They will issue the submission notice directly after they receive your dossier. However, in the future, they may process some random check of your record filling dossiers. And if they think your information is not good enough, they will request you to submit some supplemental documents for your record filling notification. And besides, if your product is a polymer of low concern, besides to confirm it's a polymer of low concern by GPC reports, you may also to check some exclusion conditions. If your polymer meets any exclusion conditions, you need to it means you can't process the record filling, and then you may need to consider the registration directly. And if you need to process simplified registration or regular registration, the most important step is to firstly identify your target substance. You need to check the hardest property of your target substance, especially if they have PBT properties or they have other highly hazardous properties. This is mainly because according to this new China REACH, if it's PBT substance or other highly hazardous substance, you need to provide both. You may need to provide some extra data reports. So basically, for both simplified registration and the regular registration, you first need to comply with the basic data requirements, and then based on the hardest property, you are required to offer some extra endpoints, for example, like carcinogenicity, like toxicokinetics, like 2-generation reproductive toxicity reports, which are all very long-term and also very expensive endpoints. So like I said, it's very important to firstly determine the hardest property of your target substance. And for all the basic data requirements, currently the Chinese authority prefer the full test reports. You can either order the test in qualified Chinese lab, or if you have the existing reports from foreign GLP laboratories, you can use them directly. But for the extra data endpoints for the highly hazardous substance, if you find it's difficult to process the data, if you find it's difficult to process the tests, you can consider to use some alternative testing methods, for example, like QSAR, Red Cross, expert statements. So when you're preparing dossier, you are required not only to provide the reason why you can't process the test, but also those alternative test methods, which should be acceptable by the authority. So regarding the timeline of the different notification types under China REACH, it really depends on if you have the existing data and if you need to generate new data for this registration. So normally we will suggest our clients to firstly process the data gap analysis based on all existing data, and then we will develop some data strategy and then let them know how to process the registration. So if you have any concern or request of this China REACH registration, please don't hesitate to contact us. And after you complete the registration, it doesn't mean that the work of China REACH has been done. You still need to monitor the updates of the regulation and also pay attention to the post-registration management obligations. For example, activity reports. After the first time you manufacture or import the new chemical into China, you need to submit a first activity report. And basically every year after April 30th, before April 30th, you are required to submit the annual activity report if you process the registration. And also you are along your supply chain, you are required to pass all relevant China REACH information. For example, your China REACH registration number, the use you registered under China REACH, and also like the highest property, the relevant environment management requirements. Normally, all those information can be found on your final registration certificates, and you are required to follow the certificate and the information you registered on the China REACH to operate your substance in China. And after the registration, if you find some information need to be updated, for example, you need to change your company name, or you find you have more activities in China rather than those you registered under China REACH, based on different scenarios, you may either to process the registration again, or you simply submit an application to ask the authority to update your registration certificate. Last but not least, after your registration, you should keep all your China REACH relevant documents very well. For example, for regular registration and simplified registration, according to the regulation, you are required to keep all relevant documents at least 10 years. This is very important because according to our experience, every year, the local authorities in China will process some on-site inspection for China REACH activities. Normally, they will check if you complete the China REACH registration for all required substance. If the township band you registered match your real activities. So it's very important that you keep all the documents in hand, manage them well, and provide to authority for review when it's necessary. Okay, so that's just about the new China REACH. And next, I will briefly introduce the hazardous chemical management. So before I introduce, I think the most important thing is how to determine if your chemical substance or final chemical mixture product are hazardous chemical in China. So if your product is substance, it's easy. You can just simply check the catalog of hazardous chemicals, which includes 2,828 substances. You will find if it's listed, we can simply say this substance is a hazardous substance in China, and you should follow the hazardous chemical management requirements. However, for most chemical products, they are mixture or preparation. So generally, we should check the classification of the whole product. Normally, you can find in section 2 of your Chinese MSDS. So if you find any classification on your SDS, which are highlighted in blue in these two tables, it means that your final product is a hazardous chemical in China, and then you should process relevant registration or apply the permission system. So this slide just tell you what's the general hazardous chemical management obligations in China. For example, the license system, the hazardous chemical registration, and also the Chinese SDS and labeling. Because as you may know, China has its own GHS standards. So before you sell your products into China, you should prepare the qualified Chinese SDS and labeling. It may not be enough if you just simply translate your English CLP SDS label into Chinese, because they are different standards. They based on different version of UN GHS. And if you can't identify your product, you can also process hazardous identification, and then you will get the official letter and let you know what's the classification of your product in China. So if you find the product is a hazardous chemical into China, based on your different activities, you may need to apply different permission license. For example, you need to apply the manufacturer license if you want to manufacture the hazardous chemical in China. So, but to foreign companies, you may keep in mind that all these permission license requirements currently belongs to the Chinese local companies. So if you find your product is a hazardous chemical and you want to sell them into China, you may just inform your local Chinese importers to pay attention and to apply relevant license requirements or process hazardous chemical registration before they import the product into China. So actually, from the beginning of this year, that's a very important update for the hazardous chemical registration in China, which the authority is introducing a system to regulate all hazardous information. So basically, this will be fully implemented in November this year. Generally, for all the hazardous chemical products, as you can see, you will be required to put a code on your labeling package. By scanning this code, you will have access of all hazardous information like MSDS, labeling, hazardous chemical registration directly. So it's very important for all the Chinese companies to process the hazardous chemical registration and make sure their Chinese SDS and the label update in time. But for foreign companies, again, this is not your obligation, but you should support your Chinese importers to fulfill this obligation. And you may need to provide them the qualified Chinese SDS and the labeling and support them to complete the registration and generate this code. Okay, so my last part is about the China VOC. As you may know, VOC standards has been implemented in different areas like EU, USA, Korea, Japan, and literally since the end of last year, the China authorities start to introduce different latest version of VOC standards, and currently they all have been implemented. So basically in China, if you are involved in these four industries, coating, clean agents, adhesives, and ink industries, before you sell your products into China, you should also consider to comply with these VOC standards. So generally for China VOC standards, it's based on different industry and also based on the specific uses. They have different national standards which you need to comply with. As you can see here, I list some main VOC standards in China based on different industries. And due to the time limit, I'd like to use the coating industry as a reference. So here I just list most main China VOC standards for coating products. For example, as you can see, the woodware coatings, the architectural wall coatings, the industrial protective coatings. So it's very important to first identify the use of your products in China, and then find the specific VOC standards accordingly. And normally in every Chinese VOC standards, it will include like the substance or the composition you need to check, and also the relevant limit value of each composition. You need to make sure that your value is less than the limited value, and also for each standard, they also give you a test guidelines of such to test this limit value. So you can either find a lab, you need to appoint a qualified lab to process such testing reports and prove that your product is compliant under China VOC standards. So once you get the testing reports and make sure that your product is compliant based on the specific use of the China VOC standards, it's also very important to make sure that you indicate such information on your packaging and the labeling. For example, here we use the woodware coating as an example. And if your product is relevant and you find your product is compliant under the standards, you need to make sure that you indicate this product is qualified under these standards on your package. It's very important, and it may become a main focus when you process a custom clearance, and the local customs in China may check such package. Okay, So here I just prepare a general procedure of complying with the China VOC standards. Like I just mentioned, you should firstly determine your product type and the specific use in China, find the specific VOC standards, and understand the required compensation limits, order the tests in a qualified laboratories. If you find that your product is okay, then that's fine. You indicate that your product is compliant on your packaging. If not, you may need to adjust your formula and then process the test again until you make sure that your product is compliant on the wheels. So in the first half of this year, actually, there are already many practical supervision cases from different local customs in China and also the local marketing authorities. So here I just give you several examples. As you can see, many customs, for example, the Shanghai custom, the Guangdong custom, they will process some check when they do the custom clearance. If they find that you are not qualified under the Chinese VOC standards, they may reject your products at the custom. And also, even after your products are launched on the Chinese market, the local marketing authority may also check your products, and they may do some testing to make sure that your relevant VOC standards are qualified. So before I end my presentation, I just listed several tips for your reference. So firstly, based on your different products, you may consider to establish an inventory of all the compositions and all the product types based on different standards. So before you sell your products into China, you need to understand what standards should be considered, what regulation should be considered, and then you may order the tests in a qualified Chinese lab. Although these Chinese VOC standards are mainly for the local companies, but if you sell the products from overseas, at the custom, they may also require to provide the qualified testing reports. And as you know, VOC standard is only one regulation of the Chinese chemical regulations. So since it's all chemical related products, you also need to consider like China REACH, Chinese SDS and the labeling, and also hazardous chemical regulations. So it's very important to have a very comprehensive understanding of different chemical regulations in China before you sell your products into China. Okay, so so that's my presentation today. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Brian. Great overview, in-depth information. Thanks a lot. The audience, we are now able to take questions. If you would like to pop in your questions into the chat function, then we will be able to read them out now and Brian will be able to answer them. So we wait a few minutes until the first questions come through. I've got the very first one already here. It's for China REACH. If we completed the registration before 2021, is it still valid after the new China REACH has been implemented?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So as we know, many companies actually complete the China REACH registration before this year based on the previous version of the regulation. So according to the authority, it still will be valid. However, if you in the future, if you find that your previous registration need to be updated, you should follow this new China REACH to make the updates according to it.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, and then we've got another one.
Mhm.
Could you let us know the difference between China REACH and EU REACH?
Yeah, sure. I think many attendees should be very familiar with EU REACH. So I think the main difference is for EU REACH, it's actually focused on both existing chemical substance and the new chemical substance. But for China REACH, you only need to focus on the new chemical substance. So if you find your target substance is existing chemical in China, you don't need to consider China REACH. And the second thing is you may notice under China REACH, there are only 3 notification types, less than 1 ton per year, 1 to 10 ton, and more than 10 ton per year. But for EU REACH, it's required if your tonnage band is more than 1 ton per year, and they have 4 tonnage bands. So, and similar as China REACH, different tonnage bands has different data requirements. But here I also want to highlight that if you complied with EU REACH before and you are the data owner, normally your existing reports for EU REACH should be acceptable under China REACH, which means you don't need to generate new testing reports again. You can use your existing reports directly for China REACH registration.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Don't have further questions at the minute.
Okay.
So thank you very much to you, Bryan. Dear audience, please feel free to reach out to Chemical Inspection and Regulation Service, short CIRS, on the platform afterwards. Bryan and his team will be there to answer any further questions and get in touch with you. So thank you very much to you, Bryan. Thank you to all attendees for watching. Have a great day. Enjoy Chemspec Digital 2021. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.